We just got to get going, right? We're going to start at number 3, or we got 7, so we got to keep it moving. Otherwise, it'd just be one continuous seminar a week, right? So suddenly everybody's quiet. Oh, we don't want that. All right, so far, we have seen the argument of the fine-tuning of the universe and the cosmological argument of cause, right? If everything that is in existence must have been caused by something. We see a lot of cause in the universe, so who caused it? And really, the only, I think, satisfying answer is God created the heavens and the earth. Somebody outside of time and space created it. As a matter of fact, do you know and remember how the Bible begins? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning is a time reference. God created is the one who brings things into being. Heavens and earth is space. So even in the very first verse of the Bible, it's affirmed that God created space and time and being. But we're going to continue on, and I have a lot more to show you. And some of this might be a bit of a brain overload, and that's okay. That will help you sleep well tonight. But I want you to see it, and the reason why I bring videos, so just to give you an idea, today will be a lot of videos. Tomorrow, quite a few. Wednesday, a relative amount, and then we'll tone it down. All right? So, but I think these are very helpful because they kind of summarize it, put it into perspective, helps everybody to understand what these evidences of God really are about. So the next one is, as the argument that we've spoken about, if you see a language written somewhere, you know somebody has been communicating, right? And the more complex the language, the more intelligent the one who's communicated, right? If you have children or grandchildren, or if you've been around children, you should read their first writings. It's very cute, right? Because they don't know the spelling, they'll sound it out, and it's very basic, and it misses components and all of that. But at the same time, you see intelligence is at work, right? There's intentional thought. And even though it's sometimes harder to read because you have to sound it out to figure it out, and they don't know all the rules of the language yet, you can see there's an intentional effort, right? No parent, when a child comes home, says, well, listen to me, I don't think you made that because clearly there's not a completely intelligent being that created that. Or this must have come into existence by itself. I don't think that you did it. No, you know. There's a sentence, and if it's spelled out in a way that you have to sound it out to understand the words, you're going to figure out this was probably my child instead of the teacher. Otherwise, you got to send your kids to a different school, right? So in other words, if we begin to see language, especially complex, specified, and meaningful information, that points to an intelligent being, a creator of that information. If we discover information in creation, it then points to an intelligent creator. Right? If we want to make a computer, we require information in the form of coding to make it work. If we want to make a machine, it requires careful math to make it functional. And it doesn't have to just be complicated, it needs to be precise. There needs to be actually logic, and that logic needs to be written out throughout the information. I'm sure all of you have had computer issues at times, especially if you use Windows computers. If you are from, well, many of you are older than me, but if you remember MS-DOS, anybody remember MS-DOS? Right? I just heard somebody is like around 20. So MS-DOS is what's lying underneath, you know it probably, but it's lying underneath Windows. Actually, there's still access to it if you wanted to go CW, backspace, delete all, or right, reformat. Don't want to do that. But anyway, so by that time, when we had to format this, we'd have to do the precise code. And if you get one letter different or 1 point different, it wouldn't work. Right? It had to be precise because the computer was a reader of information. If you didn't do it well, you couldn't build or install or delete or take files off or all the rest of it. Now, how about this world? Normally we think of information originating from human beings. But molecular geneticists have discovered that our DNA is filled with coded information. As a matter of fact, this is a very exciting part of scientific development. Every year, and then every couple of years, there's huge steps, but every year people come to the conclusion it's actually a lot more complicated than we thought. When I was young, they thought that a cell in the body was basically kind of the smallest that you can really go. Now, a cell is a world in itself. And I think the further we progress, there's an infinite amount of studying further into it. It's just our tools don't allow us to decode all the information kept in our DNA. And so information always comes, as we have discovered and experienced it, from intelligence. Now, how about the argument then? Well, a random chemical process cannot produce intelligent information. So who's the one who put the information in there? Who's the one who created it? An intelligent being must have created this code that is so complex that none of us could unravel the entire code by ourselves in even one cell of our body. It just is simply beyond us. Think about if you are ever have been in touch with the medical world and you think that you go to a doctor and the doctor understands the human body. It doesn't take long until you realize that we really don't understand the human body. We understand parts, we understand certain things, but the great majority of the human body and the issues, we're groping in the dark. We're trying to figure it out, and we don't understand it. Why? Because the human body is such a complex, infinite, seemingly infinite amount of information that all the most brilliant people in the world have not been able to figure out how it exactly functions on the molecular level. So let's think of this DNA as evidence. Have a look.
In the world of science and religion, a heated debate rages on about the origins of life. In the world of science and religion, a heated debate rages on about the origins of life. Some argue that evolution and natural selection are responsible for the complex features of the natural world, while others claim that an intelligent creator is behind it all. At the center of this debate is DNA, the genetic material that contains the instructions for building and maintaining living organisms. While many scientists believe that the complexity of DNA can be explained through natural processes, proponents of intelligent design argue that it is evidence of a divine creator. One of the arguments used to support this idea is the vast amount of information contained within DNA. The human genome alone contains 3 billion base pairs, a staggering amount of data that some argue could not have arisen through chance mutations. They believe that this complexity is evidence of an intelligent creator, who designed DNA with a specific purpose in mind. The code of life is made up of a sequence of 4 different nucleotides: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, that are arranged in a specific order to form the genetic code. This code holds the instructions for the creation and maintenance of an organism's cells and tissues, including the vital proteins that sustain life. The information stored in DNA is mind-bogglingly complex and precise, and is passed on from generation to generation through the miracle of reproduction. But how could such a marvel have come into existence? Proponents of intelligent design argue that the intricacy and specificity of DNA is simply too great to have arisen through natural processes alone. They contend that it must be the handiwork of an intelligent creator who designed it with a specific purpose in mind. One of the key arguments made by supporters of intelligent design is the minuscule probability of random mutations generating the specific sequences of nucleotides required for the development and function of living organisms. They argue that the chances of this occurring by chance alone are so low as to be virtually impossible. Renowned mathematician and philosopher William Dembski is one of the most prominent advocates of this argument. He has written extensively about the concept of specified complexity as evidence for intelligent design, contending that the information content of DNA is too complex and too specific to have arisen by chance, and therefore must be the product of an intelligent creator. Amidst the heated debate between supporters of intelligent design and those who adhere to evolutionary theory, one contentious topic remains at the forefront of their discussion: the role of DNA as evidence for an intelligent creator. The concept of irreducible complexity is a key argument used by advocates of intelligent design to support their position. They contend that certain biological structures and systems are too complex to have evolved gradually and must have been intentionally designed by a higher power. One example often cited to support this argument is the bacterial flagellum, a complex structure that enables bacteria to move through liquid environments. According to proponents of intelligent design, the flagellum requires all of its components to function, making its evolution through natural selection impossible. However, this argument has been met with criticism from the scientific community. Scientists argue that the flagellum could have evolved gradually, with many of its components having other functions in the cell that could have evolved independently. Despite the opposition, the debate rages on, leaving the question of DNA's origins unanswered. The universe we live in is an incredible and awe-inspiring place, full of mystery and wonder. But could it all be the work of a higher power, a mastermind creator? The fine-tuning argument suggests just that, pointing to the many physical constants and conditions necessary for life to exist as evidence of an intelligent creator. Consider the cosmological constant, which governs the expansion rate of the universe. If this constant were even slightly different, the universe would not have formed stars and galaxies as we know them. Or the strength of the electromagnetic force, which governs the interaction between charged particles, without which stable structures of atoms and molecules necessary for life would not be possible. Proponents of the fine-tuning argument argue that the probability of these conditions arising by chance is so low that it is implausible to suggest that they are the result of random chance. William Lane Craig, a prominent Christian philosopher and theologian, is one of the leading voices in support of the fine-tuning argument. But critics of the argument argue that it relies on a number of assumptions and simplifications, and that there may be other explanations for the apparent fine-tuning of the universe. Is it all just a matter of chance, or is there truly a higher power at work? The debate continues, but one thing is for sure: the universe is a magnificent and wondrous place, full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for watching.
Sorry, otherwise I hear an echo. Can you still hear me this way? I'll put it back closer. Well, I want to show you one of this mathematical amazing possibilities. I'm going to need Hugo for that. Can you come here for a second? He didn't know this. All right. Can you show everybody your knees? Are there any spots on your knees? You have any good crusts of stuff you fell on?
Yeah.
Where?
Here.
Okay, one would be fine. We do care for this boy. The reason why I call it a miracle is, Hugo, what happened? Why is there a crust on your knee?
Because I got hurt and it was bleeding.
You got hurt and you were bleeding. You know, I think it's really incredible that when you fell, you thought, you know what, I need to put a little crust on here. And in that way, after a while, the skin underneath that crust can grow back together, and then the crust can come off and my knee will be back as new. I think that's very smart that you thought about that. Is that how it happened? You didn't? Then how did your knee fixed up?
Well, it's true, but I didn't think of that.
You didn't think of that. Did your body think of that itself?
Well, yeah.
How did it know that? How did your knee know that it was hurting? Must have been some information going on. sending it to the brain, and the brain then causing the body to restore and rejuvenate cells and bring your knee right back into order. Right? Now, I was telling you I was going to show you a miracle, and that's a miracle in itself, right? Of all the ways that your skin repairs, and you never think about it. Now, when you're older, you get to see that miracle a little longer because it takes longer, right? But it's amazing. But that's not the miracle. This boy is a miracle, right? Because my wife and I, we were praying that we would get a child, but we never designed you. We weren't thinking, you know what, we're going to give Hugo these amazing, beautiful eyes and this perfect nose here, and then we're going to put a nose and a mouth on him so that he can breathe in, and then his heart can beat and oxygen can be in his body. All of that is perfectly fine-tuned. Right? I can actually make things happen. Watch this. Put your hands up. Did you know that that's a miracle? That he listens? No. If you think about it, for Hugo, you're doing great, buddy. For Hugo to raise his hands means that he has ears. And those ears are vibrating the signal from his ears to his brains. That causes him then to process that information that came from my mind that I sent to him. That information becomes translated in his huge brain. And then he sends a signal down to not just his hands, but his arms, his shoulders, and every muscle in between to be raised up his hand. All the while, his heart is pumping, his oxygen is breathing to enable this entire process. That's a miracle. Right? That requires an amazing amount of information. You can be seated. You did a great job, Miracle. You know, it's interesting. So in the Netherlands, I have a lot of colleagues that didn't believe in God, except when babies were born. That's a miracle when you see that. And I always say, right? You didn't come up with this. Right? After Abigail was born, our daughter, we were so excited. We wanted another child, and lo and behold, Noah came. Right? We didn't know Noah was going to look like Noah. God created him and fabulously made all this information. Now, we put a little food in him, and put a little water and milk and everything else in him, but somehow this mathematical wonder called Abigail, Noah, and Hugo was able to convert all that food into proteins and everything, well, take the protein from that food and be able to build an entire human body that in Abigail's case is growing so fast that your son can no longer wear normal shoes when she wears high heels because they're about the same height soon. Right? In other words, you gotta just make sure you don't go over me, okay? Otherwise, your future husband will be scared. You're too tall. All right? I mean, it's amazing how complex the human body really is. Even the smallest amount, and we're not even talking about the eyes yet. Just the conversion of information, of receiving the light and calibrated that, and the amount of data or RAM that is necessary, if you want to talk in computer terms, to be able to convert that into the ability to perceive what is in front of us so that we don't walk into everything that is right in front of our noses. Right? So DNA has a lot of information, but the human body. Right? Just think about one finger, what it requires to move one finger. Right? So I think this is one of my favorite one of my favorite arguments for the creation of God, the incredible amount of information that is in the world. Secondly, he touched on it a little bit. We're going to talk about irreducible complexity. The argument of irreducible complexity goes like this. Some biological systems, like the bacterial flagellum or the human eye, requires all their parts to function, and removing one part breaks the whole system. Now, why is this an important argument? Well, if something evolves, it starts with something simple, and then it's things that are added to improve it. But if you have things in this world where one cannot consist without the other, how are you going to, which started? Right? Which came first? And if that's not just once, but repeatedly throughout creation, then the whole evolution argument falls apart. How can something have evolved that doesn't just have two things dependent on each other, but many things? And if any of those components would not be there, the entire thing would be broken. Right? Those of you who are good with cars, you know, if you take the smallest parts out of certain engine components, the entire car stops working. Now, if we see that in creation, how could that have evolved? Right? If something has multiple interacting parts, like a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a hook, and a filament, how could that have evolved? Each part contributes to the motor's basic function, and removing any of these parts will make the entire system non-functional. So if we see in this world not just information, but complex beings and entities and parts of this creation that requires every part to be in it, then there must be somebody who's put them all together and made them function as one. Listen to this.
The bacterial flagellum was one. The bacterial flagellum was one of the central examples of irreducible complexity Behe highlighted in his book.
If you take away the propeller, if you take away the motor, if you take away the clamps that hold it onto the cell's membrane, take away any of a number of different parts, it's not that the flagellum is going to spin half as fast as it used to, or it's broken. It doesn't work at all. It's like taking the propeller off of an outboard motor on your boat and wondering how far now you can go in the water. You can't go anywhere. So that's a problem for Darwin's theory, because Darwin's theory says that things evolve by working a little bit, maybe not very well, but a little bit, and then a mutation, a change comes along that helps it work a little bit better, and that helps the organism survive and have more offspring, and so then another change comes along, and another, and it gradually builds up to the final structure. Well, that might work for some things, but it doesn't work for systems that are irreducibly complex, things like the bacterial flagellum. Because, well, if you wanted to build an outboard motor for a boat, what would you start with? Would you start with, say, just an iron rod that, in the future would attach a motor to the propeller? Well, what's that going to do? It's not going to do anything. Would you start with just the propeller? Well, that's not going to do anything. It's not attached to anything. Would you start with just the motor? Well, that's not going to propel you anywhere. So with irreducibly complex systems like the flagellum, Darwin's idea is dead in the water, like a boat with an outboard motor that doesn't work.
Natural selection selects or favors in variations that confer a functional advantage on a system. Many of the simpler versions that you could imagine of the bacterial flagellar motor perform no function at all. And so if you imagine trying to build a flagellar motor, adding parts one by one until you finally get to the complete system, you're going to encounter configurations of parts that confer no function, in which the motor simply will not work, at which point the evolutionary process will terminate. It will cease to continue because the system conferring no function will not be preserved and passed on to the next generation.
The next argument is one of my favorite, the next pieces of evidence, and this is the beauty of creation, or the aesthetic argument. It's one of my favorites because I like things that are beautiful. But beautiful is not functional and logical. And remember, if you think about in an evolutionary worldview, in a perspective that God has not created the world, right? Because that's what we're looking at. Is there a God? Then an evolutionary process would be based upon function, right? Not on things that are non-functional. It seeks to go the most straightforward way, the most easy way. And so why do we find in this world things that are beautiful but not necessarily functional? Think about music, mathematical harmony in nature, symmetry in crystals, fractals in trees and coastlines, We enjoy them because they're beautiful. And none of them are essential for survival. So why are these things, how did these things come into being? Why do we have appreciation for it? Where does this beauty come from, and why do we have the capacity to perceive and delight in beauty? Could there be that God created us to enjoy things that are not necessarily functional, that are giving us joy because He wants us to reflect? And so listen to this as we think of this argument.
This argument has particular intuitive strength. Whether evoked through art, literature, music, or observing nature, our sense of beauty has been a cause for many a human endeavor. The argument from beauty is this, that our desire and experience of beauty can only be reasonably explained through theism. That's belief in God, since naturalism provides no explanation. You see, from the Christian worldview, beauty is seen as a property grounded in God, the divine creator of all things. Whether it be found in a crimson sunset, a glittering night sky, a gleaming smile, or the sound of Mozart, the beauty we experience signifies a world imbued with meaning and value by God as the author of beauty. Although one could argue that these metaphors are mere subjective qualities, from a psychoanalytic perspective, they betray an unconscious longing for a truly transcendent reality. As C.S. Lewis once stated, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off is no mere neurotic fantasy, but the truest index of our real situation. In contrast, naturalism provides no adequate explanation for our desire and experience of beauty. The problem is that an impersonal and closed world of elementary particles and physical laws cannot account for the existence of properties like morality, truth, and beauty. Besides, why should an impersonal and meaningless universe care about beauty? Evolution provides no answers for our desire for beauty and for the development of our aesthetic faculties. Professor of philosophy Anthony O'Hare rightly noted, from a Darwinian perspective, truth, goodness, and beauty, and our care for them are very hard to explain. On the other hand, in a universe conceived by a benevolent creator, the reality of beauty and our experience of it are far less surprising. When we see finite beauty as a quality derived and grounded in God Himself, it will draw our attention to the infinite beauty of heaven. As theologian F.R. Tennant once wrote, God reveals Himself in many ways, and some men enter His temple by the gate beautiful.
Why there is beauty is because God loves beauty. And God Himself is beautiful. The Bible describes this in many different places. And I think that there is often a misunderstanding nowadays in our world. When people think of God, we think of God as somebody who's out there who kind of controls this world as puppets, and He tells you what to do and what not to do. And that really misses the character of God. We're going to see that when God created the world, He created it beautiful. He made a beautiful garden and placed mankind in that garden. And you can see God's love for beauty in all of creation. Right? So for me, it's one thing to talk about the argument of beauty, and I think it's a good argument, I think it's a clear argument. But I love to take one step further And sometimes I'm not a tree hugger, but one of the things that I love is when I walk through a forest and I see a tree, to take a step closer, and then you begin to see the carvings in the tree. And then I take another step closer, and I make sure that nobody's watching me and just wondering, what is this guy doing? But I like to get really up close, and you begin to see details you never thought about the tree that is in your own yard. You should try it. Make sure nobody's watching again, because people are going to think you're weird, which is okay. But you're going to look at your own tree in a way that you never saw that tree. You've seen it for so many times, and suddenly you're going to see the beauty in that tree that you never thought of. Or take a blade of grass, just a random blade of grass, and hold it very close to your eyes with enough light, and you're going to see an intricate design of even that leaf. Everything is created with beauty. Right? My family and I, we just came from a vacation to the West Coast. Unimaginably beautiful. Right? The Grand Canyon, and you see that expands, and the glory of that. It's amazing. Right? And there's good reason why a lot of people, when they go into creation, they begin to think about God. Why is that? Well, what did Romans 1 say? You can know me. You can see my invisible attributes, my power, my divine nature by the things that have been made. We live in cities. We don't often see the beauty of God's creation. And so we're not faced as much with the things that God made. But every now and then, look at your hand. The beauty even of the fingerprints in your hand is glorious. Well, we're going from beauty to mathematics, which for some of us is a very logical connection. And for others, it's a very illogical connection, right? If you didn't like math in school, you think that math is the opposite of beauty. But I think the mathematical argument, we've seen aspects of this already, but this is really an amazing argument. It's not so much about that things are mathematically accurate. That's not the center of the argument, but that the abstract part of the universe is necessary, that laws are necessary for this world to function, and there must be mathematical precision, right? Think about a world that would be that wouldn't have the abstract laws of mathematics, right? So if I take this pen, I can tell you with pretty good precision and pretty good certainty that when I let it go, it's going to fall to the ground. All right, are you ready? This is not a magic show. There's no tricks. But I'm going to make this go to the ground in 3, 2, 1. Now that's amazing, isn't it? I think all of you, this was worth the cost of the entire seminar for you, right? That you'd see this. And you say, well, that's obvious because it always falls down. And if you think deeply, well, it's gravity. Why does gravity work? Well, it's the laws of gravity. Who wrote the laws? Why is anything abstract? There's all these laws and regulations. Why do they function? Who caused that to be? Where does it come from? Well, that's the idea. When something is abstract, mathematical truth that is abstract, where does it come from? How can it be universal? How can it be true everywhere? How can it be necessary? Without it, the world wouldn't function. And how can it be eternal? If it is true now, and it's always been true, these abstract truths, where does it come from? Where was it started? And such truth cannot be ignored. And so let's listen to this and see the beauty of mathematics.
Why does mathematics work? Think about it. Mathematical entities like numbers, sets, and equations are non-physical and abstract. They can't cause anything. Yet, for some reason, the physical universe operates mathematically. As Galileo put it, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. Scientists do not use mathematics merely as a convenient way of organizing the data. They believe that mathematical relationships reflect real aspects of the physical world. Science relies on the assumption that we live in an ordered universe that is subject to precise mathematical laws. Thus, the laws of physics are all expressed as mathematical equations. For example, Pythagoras discovered that when a vibrating string is shortened by half, it plays the same note 1 octave higher. Isaac Newton's observations led to his discovery of the law of gravity, a mathematical relationship expressed as a simple equation that enabled us to enter the space age. Mathematics enabled astronomers to pinpoint the location of a previously undiscovered planet. And James Clerk Maxwell used mathematics to predict the existence of radio waves. Albert Einstein, working with theoretical mathematics developed 50 years earlier, formulated his general theory of relativity, a pillar of modern physics. His calculations were later confirmed during a solar eclipse, when Arthur Eddington observed light from distant stars bending around the sun. Then, Peter Higgs used mathematical equations to predict the existence of an elementary particle. It took 48 years, billions of dollars, and millions of man-hours for experimental scientists to finally detect the Higgs boson. How do we explain the astonishing applicability of math to the physical world? In 1960, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist and mathematician Eugene Wigner published an article that stunned the scientific community entitled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences." Wigner concluded that the effectiveness of mathematics is a miracle, which we neither understand nor deserve. Why is mathematics so effective? Philosophers who address this question fall into two camps. Naturalists, who believe that all that exists concretely is space-time and its physical contents. They exclude supernatural causes. And theists, who believe in a God who created the universe. Naturalists cannot provide a reasonable explanation for why mathematics applies to the physical world. It's just a happy coincidence. But this is no explanation at all. At most, naturalists can say that it's not surprising that math applies to the world because the world itself just happens to have a mathematical structure. So, of course, mathematics applies to it. But this explanation is unsatisfactory for two reasons. First, a great deal of mathematics in science cannot be physically realized. For example, imaginary numbers and infinite dimensional spaces. Although these concepts are useful, physical reality cannot possibly have the structure they describe. And second, this answer still doesn't explain why the physical universe has such a stunningly elegant mathematical structure. By contrast, for theists, mathematics works so well in the physical world because God has chosen to create the world according to the plan he had in mind. The first-century Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria offered this analogy. When a king wants to build a city, a trained architect first designs in his mind a plan of all the parts of the city that are to be completed. Then he begins to construct the city out of stones and timber, looking at the model and ensuring that the material objects are built according to the plan. Mathematics and physics work so well together because the same mind that designed the universe on a mathematical model also built the universe on the same mathematical model. All of this adds up to an argument for the existence of God that goes like this. If God does not exist, the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence. But the applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence. Therefore, God exists. Eugene Wigner was right. The effectiveness of mathematics in the physical world is quite literally a miracle, which is best explained by the existence of God.
All right. In other words, the mathematical precision of existence requires a rational creator that put it all together so perfectly. I enjoyed math when I was young, but now that the older you get, the more you realize how complex the world works. The more you study, the more you dive into how the processes of life are just completely necessary for us to even live, right? Because of math, because God has created this world in such a way that it exists and functions, you can walk out in the morning and not be scared that you will float up into the sky like a balloon, right? It's mathematically reliable that the world upon which you walk stays in existence. Right? Think about the moon and everything and all the mathematics in between. You're so dependent upon mathematics that it's become completely normal. And yet, when you take a step back, you realize the incredible mind of God. Right? And if you try to design something, if you've ever been trying to create something or build something, I had the privilege of working in China as an account manager, junior account manager, and we had to design a kind of like a special wheelchair. The mathematics and the trial and error that goes into producing something as simple as that. And then there was another product. We had to design a drawer of a kitchen table of Hettich, the German kitchen builder. And they had this design where you pushed it in, there were 2 springs on the back, and there was rubber on the edges so that when it comes back, it doesn't go click and it doesn't get stuck, right? So that it smooths in so that you have kind of a luxury feel of a kitchen drawer handle when you pull it out, right? If you think, that's all too much, just check your car and see how many things are smooth and gentle and all of that for the experience that we experience. It took a German engineer 4 months to calculate the thickness of the rubber and the strength of the spring and the location of the spring and the size of the handle to figure out how to make that happen. That's not even alive, right? That requires energy to enter in, but mathematics is everywhere. Where does mathematics come from? Why does it work? Because God created the world. And He made it and caused it to be mathematically necessary. I want to look at one final argument, and then we'll come to our conclusion. And this is the mind argument, or the conscious argument. The mind argument goes like this. The mind argument observes that the existence of consciousness, rationality, intentionality, and immaterial mental properties cannot be explained by purely physical processes, and therefore point to a transcendent, immaterial mind as the ultimate source of all minds. Just think about this. If the world had really come into existence through a big bang, why does there have to be consciousness? Where does consciousness come from? Where does reason come from? What is the necessity of the evolutionary process for anything alive to come, let alone mind and thought and consideration? Where does consciousness, the subjective experience, come from? Why do we think of each other? Where does the ability to grasp abstract truths come from? Where does intentionality, thought about things, come from? Where does genuine agency come from? Free will. Your desire that you can pick something up and drop something somewhere else. Where does it come from? If you look at the evolutionary idea, that has caused a whole host of issues. Right? Imagine if we didn't have free will. The world would be a lot more organized. If all we did was live like a tree and stand there, why do we exist? Why do we have minds that can think and reason? Where does it come from? Do we really want to say that we came out of an explosion and out of that consciousness came into being? Who designed consciousness? How about immaterial properties? Thoughts are not material. Why do we have thoughts? Have you ever thought about your thoughts? Now you're thinking about it. Why do you have thoughts? Why do you have personality? Who made your personality and your thoughts? Who gave you the ability to think and to be conscious, to be aware? Or the idea of self-awareness. Right? If you're like, well, I don't know if I have self-awareness. All right? Tomorrow, put a clown suit on, And go stand in the middle of Grand Rapids and wave your hands to everybody. You're going to be very self-conscious. Right? Do anything out of the ordinary, you're immediately self. Where does it come from? Who cares? Why do you care? Why do you have the idea of relationships with each other? Physical processes cannot account for mental realities. Right? In a purely physical view, right? The idea of things are physically evolving. Atoms have no consciousness. Chemical reactions have no meaning. They're just chance that's producing. Neurons have no aboutness, and physical causes are deterministic, not rational. That is nothing in a natural process that creates rationality. So where does rationality come from? From a mind, from thought, from planning. Minds must come from a superior mind. And so the conclusion can only be the existence of finite, conscious mind is best explained by an infinite, eternal mind. In short, if humans are merely biochemical machines, why do we have subjective thoughts and feelings and understanding? I'm going to show you one more thing.
The origin of consciousness is one of the most compelling lines of evidence for the existence of God. The next 5 minutes will show you why. Have you ever looked out at the sky and contemplated your own existence? At some point in your life, you may have worried about the future and even considered your own death. What are you thinking about right now? It probably has something to do with this video. A minute ago, you may have been thinking about what to have for lunch, or which household chores you need to do. Every day, millions of thoughts pass through our minds, some of them brief and unimportant, others challenging and worthy of plenty of time and attention. But have you ever wondered, where did the ability to think come from in the first place? While your body is running countless operations at any given second, breathing, pumping blood, sensing the world around you, digesting food, and so forth, all of those can be accounted for as natural occurrences. Most creatures perform such operations without any conscious thought. But what about the thoughts which are conscious? What about the ideas that pass through your mind each second? How did we develop the ability to process and perceive these thoughts? The fact is, we are conscious beings. But what is consciousness? Consciousness is the fact that the mind is aware of itself and the world around it. It is not merely intelligence, as animals have intelligence and even technology can give us artificial intelligence. It is intelligence plus rationality, awareness, and abstract thinking. How can evolution explain such consciousness? In theory, over billions of years, we developed from nothing into conscious beings. Non-life became life, which eventually became sentient, intelligent life. How did we get from nothing to where we are right now? A moment in which you are hearing these words and watching this video and forming your thoughts in response to it. The naturalist worldview on which evolution is based says that the physical universe is all we have. But in this framework, humans are essentially living, breathing computers who amount to little more than bodies that operate solely by biological operations. So, consciousness would have had to develop itself. This theory states that over time, as organisms evolved into more complex creatures, at some point along the way, self-awareness developed. One explanation holds that consciousness is just a natural outworking of our neurons, competing for attention. Whatever is stimulating the brain the most takes precedence and comes to the forefront of our mental processes. One of the biggest problems with a naturalistic explanation is this: the whole of the body is clearly greater than the sum of its parts. The fact that we can learn, reason, perceive, and think abstractly shows we are not just material creatures. There is no place in the body a surgeon can open up and point to as the center of consciousness. Yes, the brain directs what consciousness we have, but our thoughts are not naturally occurring phenomena, which can be explained in the way that sensations can be, through the firing of neurons across synapses. In other words, We have a natural explanation for how the brain processes information, but we have no such natural explanation for how the brain perceives the information. Every thought the brain has in this discussion about consciousness is a thought it is having about itself. We can speak of how we occupy our bodies, but who is saying that? Who is doing the occupying? It is our conscious mind that clearly perceives itself separately from the body's purely physical aspects. The brain and the mind, in this sense, are two separate factors. A body with a brain can be taught to eat food and even sense its sweet, salty, sour, or bitter taste. But without a conscious mind, we cannot formulate thoughts as to how we liked or disliked the food. We could be taught to throw a ball, but the mental calculations involved in determining velocity, direction, and arm angle required to get the ball to its target require conscious thought. Coincidentally, we can process the information as to how all of this works, but to understand it we need such conscious thought. There is a second level of operation involved in all of these processes beyond the mere electrical system of the brain. Naturalism cannot account for this mind-body split. If evolution were true, it would have an explanation for how unintelligent, unconscious organisms gave rise to beings who can hear these discussions and think them through. So, how do we explain the origin of consciousness? How did we as creatures gain this ability? The clearest, most logical conclusion is that consciousness is not something we developed. It's something we were given. We were created by a conscious being, and that being gave us not only the bodies we occupy and the brains they contain, but the mind and its consciousness. If there is no God, such consciousness would not be possible. There would be no mechanism for a development of awareness alongside purely physiological functions. But with a God, it is perfectly reasonable to see why such a being would want to create creatures who are not just highly advanced animals, but are reasoning, logical creatures who can be conscientious of him and the world around themselves. You may disagree, but this leaves you with an enormous burden of proof that you must be able to answer, and that is, how are you able to contemplate what is being said here, and how are you even able to disagree? If you want to learn more about the lines of evidence that prove the...
Might do that later. You know, one of the amazing things about the Bible is it speaks about, let me turn it down just a little. It speaks about the way that we are and what science now and studies into who we are as human beings and the brain and the functions. The Bible accurately describes these kind of things 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. One of the things is Moses writes this in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. It says, "Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature." So even in the book of Genesis, the way that man is created, the Bible already declares that God, when he created man both physical and non-physical, with the life, the consciousness, a spirit that comes from God that he placed in mankind, and when they come together, then they're a living human being. Now you say, well, how can you prove that? Well, think about when somebody passes away. Every material part of the body is still there. You can pump breath into its lungs. You can cause the lungs to work. You can cause the heart to start pumping. You can try to get a blood flow going, but it doesn't come back to consciousness. Something has left that body that doesn't allow it to come back to life. Once we die, we're no longer alive, even though every cell of the body is still there. The entire body's function could be there, but something has left the body. The soul has left the body. The spirit is no longer there. The Bible declares that when somebody dies, their soul goes to God. The Lord has taken the soul and it brings it to himself. Right? I think it's amazing when you think through the Bible and the way that God describes the creation of man. Even at the very beginning, before all the scientific discoveries and the brain and the analysis and everything else, the Bible proves itself for all the scientific discoveries. And How can it do that? Well, if God wrote it, He knew what He did. He knew how He created mankind. And so I think the argument from consciousness is very powerful, not just because it helps us to understand that there must be a God, that's great, but to realize what God has given us as a gift. If He's created you with thoughts, what are the purpose of your thoughts? If He's created you in such a way that you have consciousness, that you know who you are, that I know that I'm separate from you, and more than that, that I have a responsibility, that I have an individuality, that I think of myself as something that I need to drive, right? I don't think about Doug all day, sometimes, right? But I don't think about Doug all day. I think about me and my life and my responsibilities in this world. Why is that? Why do I have that way of thinking? And that's everybody, right? Just think about how comfortable you are with your thoughts. The entire day you're thinking. And a lot of times you're thinking about yourself. Who am I? What am I doing? What is going to happen to me tomorrow? Right? You might go to the doctor and say, what is going to happen next? You're constantly thinking about your life. What do other people think of me? What do I think of them? How do I compare to other people? Right? It's amazing. If somebody wears something nice and comes into the room, you think, well, how do I compare? Or there might be a judgment. Well, that person doesn't look good. I look better. Or that person looks better than me. Right? Where do all these things come from? And then, if I'm an individual, then there's this thing of conscience. Why do I feel bad I've done something wrong? If everything is a natural process in this world, right? If it's evolution, and everything is just random order, if I do something bad to somebody, that's just part of the big evolutionary chain, and it's probably good that I bring out the weak. I crush down the weak. Actually, the more bad things I do, the better it gets, because it will just exterminate the weak. And then when you do something bad, suddenly in your conscience you feel dirty. You feel bad. You feel immoral. Why? Could it be that we were created by someone who is good, who will test and has planted in our hearts a consciousness of His goodness? Then whenever we cross that, we feel something is wrong, something is off. Well, I think the argument for consciousness, we could go on. And if you think 7 was a lot of evidences, I could have gone to 20, 30, and 40, right? So you can appreciate that we didn't go that far tonight. But I wanted to show you tonight, and I know it's taxing when you go in and out and other topics and all of that, but I wanted you to show that the evidence of God is not just in one little element. We can go into every element of creation and the human being, and even our experiences and everything else, and we press long enough and hard enough, and we're going to realize there has to be someone who created us, someone who made us. Now the next question, let me show you this. Let's go back to this Bible verse one more time before we close. What did the Bible says about this world? It said in Romans 1, 19 to 20, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." Dear friends, the evidence of God's existence is plain. It's obvious. It's clear. It's not something to fight over. Now we might say, well, I'm going to reject that God. But you have to face the reality that there is a lot of evidence for God. And so we're going to conclude with that tonight. But tomorrow we're going to answer the next question. Who is this God? And is this Bible that describes and put the challenge and passes that challenge today, can it hold up against its own test, can we see that this book accurately describes the past and also accurately, English is difficult sometimes, accurately speaks about the future? Is this book actually supernatural in what it declares? So that's what we're going to be thinking about tomorrow. I'd love to see you all back. Let's close in prayer and get off on your way. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this day. We pray that you would help us to think about these things, to ponder these things. And Father, we pray that you would help us to seek you, to walk with you. Lord, that we might grow in understanding who we are by seeing who you are. Father, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You have a wonderful night. Sleep well.